Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Lori Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good morning. 6 o'clock here in the morning, Calgary, Alberta. Tuesday morning, June 30th. I'm so happy to be here. Oh, actually, it's June 29th. We're on for 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. And we're going to continue on today talking about emotional abuse, probably the rest of the week. And it's such a huge issue, emotional abuse. And it's very hard to prove. And it's something that so many people have suffered from and suffered with. So that's why I thought we'd just cover this topic and really get into it. So yeah, I'm happy to be here. This is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, and I'm not a professional. I don't hold any professional therapist or counseling certificates. I'm just a private citizen who just pays to do my own blog talk shows. I go through this on every show because I don't know if somebody's new, listening who's new to my programs and doesn't realize, I like to make sure that people know that I'm just a private person who pays to do my own shows because, the topics of abuse are just not talked about. The only thing that we ever see about abuse in the world really is what we see in the headlines, and that's usually after the fact, after the child has been murdered or is in the hospital due to abuse-related injuries. Then of course they report it in the paper, thank God. But the thing is that then there's no other mention of how a person can get help. There's no other mention of what happens to children when they are abused like that. Very rarely, someone's column somewhere around the world might mention a little bit about it, but not very many people are talking about it in mainstream. Now, I know a whole lot of advocates who are talking about it, and I just wanted to be one more voice, really, to add to theirs. And so that's why I do these shows. And just, it's all about education and, promoting awareness, education, and prevention of child abuse. And also as a survivor, not that many people are, it's such a painful thing to deal with if you've ever been abused. And so not very many survivors, have someone to talk to and don't really realize that there's so many people out there really with the same issues, the same problems. And I just wanted to be one more voice as a survivor of child abuse to say, you're not alone, and you do deserve to have a good life and to be able to heal and move on and make sure you get some help with wherever you can, whether it's a therapist or a counselor or a group support or peer-to-peer support, but just you do reach out and get some help. So that's why I do these shows. So, I just listen at your own discretion, especially if you're a survivor of child abuse, because you want to make sure that you're in a safe enough place emotionally to listen to my shows. And if the topics of abuse bother you, then you have to turn the show off. It's your own discretion. You have to listen at your own discretion. And also young people under the age of 18, I just ask that you have an adult okay it, that you can listen to my show, because there's a lot of adult material on here. It's ultimately about stopping child abuse, all of my shows, but that's what I do. I'm studying child rights, and I'm working and advocating for children to stop abuse, child abuse. But, there's a lot of adult material on my shows, and I think children should be safe at all times and online, and I fight for child rights. I fight for the lives of children. So that's why I ask all young people to get permission to listen to my show. You'd be doing yourself a favor, myself a favor, and make sure you stay safe online and get the information on how to do that. It's so important. You really have to be careful online, and there's all kinds of good information out there on how to do that. And you can just start typing into your browser, child on internet safety, online safety for children, internet safety, and it will take you to different websites, a whole bunch of good websites that talk about how to keep yourself safe online. And it's good for parents as well, so that they know how to keep their family safe, on the internet. Because if you check out the FBI's website regarding child sexual predators and whatnot, you can see that they have some very staggering facts there. And there's generally about 750,000 child sexual predators online at any time, any given time, trying to get a hold of children. So that's why you have to keep yourself safe online. And I would ask everyone to have permission to do whatever you're doing online, and make sure that an adult knows what you're doing, because you could keep yourself safe and keep yourself from being hurt or injured or molested or abused by a child sexual predator or a pedophile, right? So important. So make sure you do get that information. Keep yourself safe, right? So we're going to continue looking at emotional abuse, and we were looking at yesterday, we're just going through the last part of this Survivor to Thriver workbook, which pertains to emotional abuse, and we were looking at corrupting, and they have some journal questions here. And so page 45 of the Survivor to Thriver workbook, and that's from www.ascasupport.org. And that's the ASCA, Adult Survivors of Child Abuse, a Morris Center program. I like their website. I like what they're doing. I wish they had a group here in Calgary. I would join up. I think they have online support. So if you don't have an ASCA chapter in your area, you can join the online support group. And I'm seriously thinking about doing that because I'm so busy right now. You know, I don't seem to have time for much. But I think it's very important to make sure that we do get some help. And so check out the website and the Survivor to Thriver workbook at the link that I just mentioned there, the www.ascasupport.org. It's a great workbook, Survivor to Thriver, 115 pages long, and it covers really everything to do with adult survivor issues regarding child abuse of every kind, of every type, and journal questions and whatnot. So we were looking at what they had to say about emotional abuse, and that it's characterized by 5 types of behaviors: rejecting, isolating, terrorizing, ignoring, and corrupting. And we went through all those, and yesterday we were finished up with corrupting. And then they have some journal questions here. And so they said if you answer these journal questions, it does help to put in place, your feelings on whether or not you were abused emotionally as a child. And I mean, everyone has experienced painful things in their lives, and sometimes, people maybe they might not even realize that they were abused, or they might think they were abused and then come to find out that maybe it was really not necessarily all that much abuse. Parents are not perfect and they do make mistakes, but abuse, especially emotional abuse, is something that would be systematic. Something that a child this would be an adult who would be systematically abusing a child, which would be whatever form it takes. Emotional abuse, psychological abuse, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, right? This would be something that the parent would be doing to harm the child on purpose, right? This is intent to abuse, an intent to cause pain, an intent to hurt or harm a child. That's abuse, right? So the questions are very clear, and I'm going to actually go through the workbook myself at some point and do the journal questions. I haven't done that yet, but I have read them. And I'll just read them out. This is questions that this Survivor to Thriver workbook asks for people to fill out and then work through the workbook, right? But some of the questions were like, did your parents frequently rant and rave about what a horrible, stupid, or ugly child you were? And did your parents frequently rant and rave, right, about what a horrible... That means, did they do this all the time? Was this just something that was just normal? And did they just consistently do this to you, right? And also, did they involve you in some illegal activity? And question 13, did your parents prevent you from having friends? Number 14, did they refuse to take you to the doctor when you were sick? Minus religious constraints, because there is that whole side of it. But if you were sick, did they refuse to take you to the doctor when you were sick? These are questions they ask us to fill out, right? Would they frequently ignore you by refusing to speak or listen to you? Number 16, were you left alone for extended periods of time before the age of 10? And did your parents make you stay home from school to take care of brothers or sisters? Would they threaten to leave you or kill you if you did not do what they said? And did they often make disparaging comments about men or women and predict that you would grow up to be just as bad? So these are some questions. Let's see if there's any more. And one more. Would your parents sabotage your effort to succeed at school, sports, work, or relationships with friends? And it says, after reading this section, you have some guidelines as to what constitutes physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. Now you can use this knowledge as a standard to determine what actually happened to you. So these were the questions that they actually had regarding emotional abuse, right? And, it's very hard on children if you've experienced any of that. And most, children who are abused emotionally probably have experienced a lot of those things, or maybe even a couple of them, right? And it's very, very hard. If your parents are like the one question where they asked if our parents frequently ranted or raved about what horrible, stupid, or ugly children we were, that's very much what I went through. And because my parents were very verbally and emotionally abusive, right, to each other and to their children, right? And this did they ignore you? Did they involve you in some illegal activities when you were young? That can happen, and a lot of people would think, really, does that really happen? Well, it does, and it sets you up to be a criminal really when you get older, because they're actually showing you how to do to be on the wrong side of the law as a child. That's really wrong, and so parents, and I know it does happen, and preventing you from having friends, that's kind of keeping you isolated, right? Not allowing you to make these relationships with your peers that you really need to be making, just to keep you isolated away from them, right? It's very damaging. You know what I mean? People might think, oh, that's not a big deal, but it really is. By refusing to take you to the doctor when you were sick, and that's something that I went through because my parents were already up on abuse charges, right? They had already been, there was an intervention done when I was a baby, and so as I was growing up, I never went, after I had my initial, stuff happen with the pediatricians and whatnot as a baby. That was pretty much it for the doctors for me. They were not going to take me to the doctor, and I think there was a reason for it, and that's because they did not want it to be counted as abuse, right? So, which it would have been. So, they did not take me to the doctor. And there was one time I fell. My nephew pulled a chair out from under me when I was really young, and I landed on a root at a barbecue in someone else's backyard, a big tree root, and I couldn't walk. I couldn't stand up. I was injured, and my parents didn't take me to the doctor. My dad just took me home, put me on the couch, and went back to the barbecue. And this was just normal behavior in our home, so I just laid around for a few days, and eventually I was able to walk again. But the whole issue is that I should have been taken in for an examination because I have already had some problems with my hip, and then that made my back and my hip even more messed up than it was. And so, but they didn't want to take me into the doctor. The doctors would have done examinations, and they would have seen bruising and all kinds of stuff, from the abuse that I had been taking. So that's the whole issue. If they, quite often they won't take you to the doctor because they don't want, people to know that what they're doing and how they're treating you, right? So that's just the whole issue. It's very, very sad. And my mom was always very sick, so the main concern was to keep my mom had to keep going to the hospital, keep going to the doctors all the time, and so the family just was paying attention to her needs, and she was the one that was abusing us, but yet her needs were coming first always. And so none of us children were taken to the doctor. My sister, one time she was running through a backyard, and she caught her eye on a barbed wire fence, and a piece of metal sliced her eye, and she was bleeding, her eye was bleeding and everything. So my mom wasn't going to take her to the doctor. My mom couldn't drive, but my mom was not going to get my dad to take her in, and she was just going to let it heal like that. And one of the neighbors happened to see my sister like that, and said, "You have to take your daughter to the you have to take her in because they have to look at her eye, and whether she'll be able to see or is she blinded or what, And my mom was just going to let that heal on its own, and there was the neighbor lady convinced my mom to take my sister in. After a lot of work trying to convince my mom to do that. So my parents were very ignorant and very sick people. My mom was manic depressive and very abusive and violent, and my dad was borderline schizophrenic, abusive and violent, and depressed as well. And so the two of them never should have had 7 children. But hey, I'm glad to be here, but they should have done a better job looking after us. And the whole issue is the abuse that we suffered at their hands was not our fault. And so, it's really unfortunate when stuff like that happens. My brother had a car accident one time, and he was involved in a car accident, and he had a huge, huge gash on his head. And did they take him to the doctor? No. This is the kind of stuff that would happen in our home. Our parents just didn't care about us, and they still don't today. Like, my dad is not, he is incapable. He is incapable of showing any kind of fatherly responsibility for any of his children. And, that's just bizarre. It's just the way it is. They think they thought of themselves and only of themselves. So, and they would say differently, but, we all know that abusers quite often will manipulate every single person around them to believe one way, think one way, because they don't want to be looked at as bad people, right? But, truth is truth, and truth is what it is. So, too bad for anybody who just, has a hard time with the truth. The truth is the truth, and that's why I'm speaking out. So this is the whole issue. It's very, very hard on kids if you've been through this, right? It says, would they frequently ignore you by refusing to speak or listen to you? That's awfully hard for a child to deal with, and my parents didn't ignore us. They actually just abused us all the time, and if we said anything and we didn't like the way we were being treated, then there was just more abuse. And so quite often we would just sit and take the abuse, not say anything. I didn't start speaking out against the abuse until I was older, but they wouldn't necessarily ignore us and just leave us alone and not talk to us or listen to us. My mom on one hand was so depressed that a lot of times she'd spend 3-4 days in bed just laying there crying or just saying, just leave me alone, I just need to sleep, or because she was so depressed, she would just go to bed, and she would forget everything, there would be no meals cooked, there would be no laundry done, there would be, she would be in bed, that'd be it. So then if you went to talk to her, she would just ignore you. One time I had a car accident myself at the age of 16, and hit a tree. This was my first car accident to hit a tree. I actually hit a couple of trees, but this was the first one, and I went home and I was pretty freaked out by it, and I was thinking, do I tell my mom? I'm going to have to because my car's damaged, but I didn't seem to have any damage, so I was all right. But the thing is I actually hit a tree, but to avoid hitting a girl on a bike, a girl on a little tricycle came out right in front of me, and in order to avoid hitting her tricycle and her, I actually went and hit a tree instead. So I was happy to do that, But the thing is, I went home to tell my mom, and she just told me, oh, okay, dear. So she didn't even care. Like, she didn't look at me to see if I was okay. My parents didn't care. They didn't care, they didn't care about us, period. I think I could have been killed and it wouldn't have mattered. When I finally did have a really bad accident, my parents came down to the hospital. They were really more mad because they had to come down in the middle of the night. They weren't necessarily upset because I was hurt. That's the type of people they were, pretty sick. So, yeah, it's pretty hard, and I know all about it. It says, did your parents make you stay home from school to take care of brothers and sisters? I've heard of survivors actually have had to do that, to take on the role of the parent, as a child. And I was the youngest of all the children, so that didn't happen to me. And also, my parents, whether I had received a beating that day or not, I mean, if I had bruises on my face, I still went to school because my mom was like, "You're going to school, I don't care." And I used to tell her, well, what about this? What if they asked me, if the teacher asked me what happened? She's like, "You tell them that I hit you," and I would be like, "Yeah, okay." So she didn't care. She didn't care if anybody saw the bruises or, the marks or anything like that. She just didn't care, period. So, I was just sent off to school no matter what condition I was in, and I didn't have a choice, so I went to school, sat there all day looking like a, pretty freaked out, because I'd be hiding bruises on my face by putting my hand on my face and things like that. It was pretty uncomfortable, and I'd be sitting there all day just thinking, do people know? Can they tell? Because I would have been crying all morning or, just upset by the whole thing, right? Now, this is when I was in elementary school, right? Very young child. So, I wasn't allowed to stay home, to do anything, so that didn't happen to me. But I actually have heard of other survivors who went through that and had to look after their younger siblings or even older siblings as a child because the parents would make them take on the role of being the parent, you know what I mean? So it's just horrible. It says, would they threaten to leave you or kill you if you did not do what they said? And I know that this happens in people's homes for sure, and I know it happened in ours. They wouldn't threaten to leave us, but they would threaten to kill us. So threatening to kill, it was just something that just went on in our home all the time. And it was, my mom would threaten to kill us or kill herself. My dad would threaten to kill the whole family. He wanted to kill the whole family because he said we were all evil, because he said my mom was evil and that all of us were the offspring of the devil. This was kind of stuff that we heard like every Sunday. And, my mom, of course, would be screaming and ranting and raving and throwing things across the room. And my dad would be abusing whoever he can get his hands on. It was just ridiculous. And they were quite often threatening to kill the whole family. Or my mom was threatening to kill herself mainly, and maybe me. She always kind of was talking about that she should kill me or should have killed me. But my dad was threatening to kill everybody. So we just grew up hearing this stuff. And, when you grow up hearing that, you're going to be think differently than a lot of children would on the playground. They're not thinking about the fact that their parents just said that last night that they should just kill the whole family so you didn't sleep well. I used to sleep with a knife by my bed, a steak knife actually. because I thought, hey, it's either you or me, and it's not going to be me. And I've always had that. I've always been feeling like that since I was a young kid, because I was at least about 8 years old when I started sleeping with a steak knife by my right under my mattress. And I used to think, well, if my mom finds it, I'm being abused anyway. So if she finds it and she just beats me up, well, then it's just more par for the course, because I was already suffering a lot of physical violence at her hands, and so I just didn't care. I just kept the knife there anyway, and that's a horrible way for children to grow up. Not wondering at night if you go to sleep whether or not your dad's going to come in and kill the whole family, whether or not that what your mom has said is true, that she's going to kill you. Not a good way for a healthy way for a child to grow up, because then the next day you're on the playground at school, not having had much sleep all night, and sitting around in fear, worried, about the whole thing. And then the next day you got to go and remember to try to fit in and learn to do your homework and learn how to socialize in the class. And it's very, very hard on children. And they said, did they often make disparaging comments about men or women and predict that you would grow up to be just as bad, and or compare you to someone else and say, well, you're going to be just like them or whatever. My parents were very much like that, and so are my siblings. Even today are like that. My siblings are somewhat abusive as well, because they condoned pretty much what my parents did. I mean, they gripe about it a little bit and say that never should have happened, and our parents were pretty sick, but they don't say that I condone what happened and that the abuse that my parents put on us was wrong, because they will not acknowledge, and they're just in denial basically, right? And so, they will quite often say, oh, well, you're just like your brother Howard, or, and to me that's a compliment, because I love my brother Howard, and my brother Howard was a drug addict, big time drug addict, and pill popper, but he was a nice guy. And the thing is I looked up to him because he was a really nice guy. He was just a drug user, and he had a lot of problems, but he grew up in the same home I did, so I wasn't necessarily going to put that on him. The thing is he had a lot of problems because of that, and I knew that. So I just looked at him for the person that he was inside, and I saw that he was a really good guy. He just had a lot of problems, and it wasn't his fault. He was just screwed from day one growing up in our home, So that's the whole issue. People in my family say, oh, you're just like your brothers, you're just like Howard or Rob, and I'll be like, well, thank you. I take that as a compliment. That's why I dedicated my book to my brothers, Howard and Robert, my book, A Life of Death, The Redemption, that just came out not too long ago. And you can get that at lulu.com. It's also an ebook now, for anybody who doesn't want to purchase the soft copy. You can download it for $5, I believe, US dollars. But that book is dedicated to my two brothers, because they went to their graves with everybody in the whole world thinking they were just losers and drug addicts and just these guys who had so many problems, and they were just, there were so many people that just run them down. Half of our family members actually disowned them and said that they were not their brothers. One of my sisters actually refused to actually acknowledge that she even had brothers. She said that she would just never acknowledge them as being alive. And stuff like that was very hurtful, and my brothers went to their graves with nobody knowing what went on behind the scenes, and that's why I did what I did. That's why I came forward, because I thought, I don't want to go to my grave with this and allow my two brothers lying in a grave and all the insults and stuff that I heard over the years about their lives go unchecked. The abusers will have to own up to that, and that's my parents. So that's why I wrote that book, and I hope everybody will get a copy of it. It details mainly the abuse directed at me. It details my life, from the point where I start writing it. It's about the age of 13 and a half, where an intervention was done on my behalf. But the thing is I do talk a lot about my brothers in that book, and my whole family, actually. And, my brothers were very special to me. And one of my brothers was killed and murdered at the age of 19. And so I didn't get to know him that well. I was 8 years old when he was murdered. And another brother was moved out of the house when I was born. He was 16 years old, and he was gone. He left the abuse there, and he was very smart to get out. He couldn't do anything to help us because he was on the streets, really, running around, rambling around. There was really no way he could look after his brothers and me and my other sister. So my older brother could not take us out of the home. My oldest sister was moved out at the age of 17. She was married and had her own children, and she was also having a lot of her own problems. couldn't even hardly raise her own children, which people don't know about, but I do. Because I got the facts, I got the truth, you know what I mean? I know what she did to her children when they were babies. My mom was actually having to look after my nephews for a little while because my sister was force-feeding them and beating on them and just the horrible things, which my nephews wouldn't have even known about. But I know the truth. So there you go, truth is truth, and I'm speaking it. So the thing is, abuse was just rampant in our family, and there's a lot of people who just want to sit and put their head in the sand and pretend that it never happened. And that's why I wrote my book, and that's why I did it. I went forward, and I, not out of revenge to get back at my parents. It's not out of revenge. It's not out of making people feel bad, my family trying to make people feel bad. I wrote it for the purpose to show people what can happen when abuse goes unchecked, and how 7 children's lives were affected by it. I wanted people to see the damage that this sort of thing causes, and that's why, we have to stop child abuse. It is so important that, if there's interventions done, there should be follow-ups. The parents should not be allowed to leave the country if there's an intervention done. My parents should have never been allowed to leave the country, and they should have been forced to go get counseling, see. So somewhere along the line, something got screwed up, and my parents were allowed to continue to do what they did. And we paid the price for it, So, and then my parents, they were so screwed up, but hey, that was their choice to do that. That was their choice to abuse. They didn't have to do that. They didn't have to treat each other the way they did, and they certainly did not have to abuse us. That was their choice to do that. So I'm not writing the book out of revenge. I'm writing it because truth is truth, and I wrote it, and it's out there and available for anybody who wants to grab a copy and share it with everyone. I appreciate it. So, it's very, very hard. And, when people say, oh, well, you're just like him, you'll never amount to anything, or, you're so bad, you'll just never make it, you're just worthless, and I heard this on a daily basis pretty much from my parents, and especially my mom. So it was very, very hard. And it says here, would your parents sabotage your efforts to succeed at school, sports, work, or relationships with friends? And this is very sad, but does happen quite a lot. Parents will try to sabotage or ruin your efforts to succeed at anything, whether it's school, sports, or friendships, things that you're involved in, outside activities out of the home. They will try to make sure that you're not allowed to be involved in any of that. My parents did not encourage any outside curricular stuff, extracurricular stuff out of school. My parents didn't even make my brothers go to school. They allowed them to drop out. So my brothers dropped out of school. The 3 of them did. One actually went on and went to college, but 3 of my brothers dropped out. Were doing drugs. Were on the streets, running around, getting into trouble at very young ages. And my parents, condoned it. They were just so worried about their own selves. They didn't care. And then, but when it came time for me and my sister to go to school, into high school, my mom asked me if I would graduate. She said, "Would you please just graduate?" She did want me to graduate, so she didn't try to sabotage my work at school. But the thing is she would never encourage us to do anything outside, like join a club or get involved in after-school sports or anything like that. So I was always on the streets running around getting high. But I was doing that because I was trying to kill the pain, and I didn't know any other way. I had to turn to drugs, and that was the only way that I could think of to be able to stay alive and to keep my sanity, because actually if I hadn't done the drugs, I probably would have gone insane. I needed to escape, and I needed somewhere to go, and that was a drug use and getting high on a daily basis. So that was my life. But the thing is very, very hard on children. So that's why if you've experienced this, you are not alone. And we have about a minute left. Make sure you do reach out. Get some help. Talk to some people about what happened to you in a group support, or if you just want peer-to-peer support, one-on-one counseling, therapy. Make sure you reach out and get some help. Don't suffer alone in silence. 3 years ago, I decided to fight to live, and I'm so glad that I did, and I hope that you will too. Instead of fighting to die, I decided, hey, I'm going to win this fight. I'm not going to let my parents win. And that was the turning point for me, was to realize that, hey, what happened to me was not my fault, and I'm going to fight to live and to help people and to help myself and help other people as much as I can. Try to deal with this and try to get over it and try to stop child abuse. So I hope that you will do the same thing and make sure that you do get some help no matter what way works for you. Find a way that works for you to get some help, right? Don't suffer in silence and suffer on thinking that, those things that your parents said or did were true, or that you deserve them, because you did not. And that we do deserve a good life, that's for sure. And so make sure that you do reach out to someone. You know, you can get a hold of me on Blog Talk Radio if you need anything, or Facebook. I'm around, and you can contact me if you need any. If you have any information I can get to you, or you just need a friend, call me up. Get in touch with me. I'll be back on, let's see, tonight. Excuse me, Dreamcatchers Talk Radio with Donna Shear at www.blogtalkradio.com/Dreamcatchers. We'll be on tonight at 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I hope you can tune in to that. And otherwise, have a great day, everybody, and we'll be talking to you real soon. Make sure you take care of yourselves and keep that hope alive, okay? Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.